with this bloodline, thereby effectively starting the human race over again. This means that the DNA of the biblical Adam and Eve would have continued, but the DNA of the Nephilim would have died out, okay? Now, it's important to note that God was still merciful to this group of people. He said they would no longer live more than 120 years, but Noah preached to those people for 120 years. Noah was the worst preacher who ever lived. He didn't have one convert at all in 120 years. Those people had ample opportunity to repent, and they didn't do it, okay? Now, here's the scientific position. Man and another physically imposing group of people called Neanderthals lived together on this earth until they inexplicably disappeared off the face of the earth all at once. The DNA of Neanderthals and man is totally different, conclusively proving that we did not evolve from them. That means that the DNA of the scientific Adam and Eve would continue, but the DNA of the Neanderthals was different and proves that they died out. Okay? Regarding the long timetable between evolution and man, scientists say that evolution requires a long time frame to work its magic. Not one instance of evolution has ever been observed, ever. Okay? So by inference, it just automatically says, well, it had to have taken a long time because we've never seen it. Okay? But what happens is that mathematically, this will not bear up. Okay? How do we know that? If you take the 4 couples that survived the flood, and just for the sake of conservatism, only use 2 people, okay? The average lifespan throughout the history of the world is 43 years, which means that since the flood until today, there would have been a little over 4,300 years that has gone by, or 100 generations. So during that period of time, you simply multiply 2.5 children. If you only multiply by 2, you've only replaced the 2 you started with. So we start with 2.5, we multiply by 100 generations, and our world population should be about 5 billion people. Obviously, with the technology increases that we've had, we actually should have more than that, and that's exactly what it is. Today, we have about 5.5 billion people, and estimates are that within a year we'll be over 6 billion people, okay? Using 1 million years, as scientists suggest, we would produce over 23,000 generations of people. And our population today would be 10 to the 2,091th power. How much is that? That's greater than all the atoms in our total universe. If you even cut it in half, that means we'd be walking on skeletons, not earth. We would have no space to put anything but skeletons. So you can see that mathematically, it just will not add up any way you look at it, okay? Now, why would Satan want to corrupt the human bloodline? That's the big question, okay? Genesis 3:15 gives us the answer again.
And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel.
Okay, enmity is a struggle, but we can see right away that we're talking about something very specific. Your offspring and hers. The key word is offspring here. So, this will take us now back to the flood. In Genesis 9:1, God says the following.
Then God blessed Noah and his sons, saying to them, Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the earth.
Okay, so the inhabitants of the earth after the flood were told by God to fill the earth. And they decided they didn't want to do that. So they go to the Tower of Babel and they decide to stay right there. And so God, as we know, comes in and he changes the languages, which forces everybody to move. If you spoke Chinese, well, you moved over there where everybody was speaking Chinese. And if you spoke German, you moved over where everybody was speaking German. And that's how God forced the people to fulfill his command, was to change the language at the Tower of Babel, okay? So, where do the different races, skin colors, eye and nose shapes come from? Science this time will tell us. This is an article from the Chicago Tribune. It's 5/18/97. It's called The Tale That Genes Tell, okay? And scientists, this is what it says, scientists now confirm that 99.99% of all humans share the same identical genetic makeup. Our outward appearance tells us almost nothing about our roots. The shapes of our noses, the color of our skins, change with the climate. So in other words, when God scattered the people at the Tower of Babel, the natural climatic changes that happen when you move to the Sahara Desert or you move to Finland automatically take place. So God was able to accomplish the race changes at the same exact time. But God has an even greater story to tell us. And this story has been saved for this generation, because it is only this generation who has had the technology to unravel this mystery. According to that same article, quote, the DNA of the Kohanim, which are the Levites, the Jewish priesthood whose duties are passed strictly from father to son, is genetically distinct from the rest of the Jewish population. God has told us that He has set the Levites apart. He did so much that even their DNA was changed. Today, the reason it's not 100% of all people are directly related in DNA, is 99.99%, is because God said He took the Levite priest for His own. And that's backed up in the Bible. Okay, that brings us to the Abrahamic covenant, which we're going to look at today. And then, passing on past that, we got God raises up Moses. Moses was a Jew who was raised in Pharaoh's court. What else was he? A murderer, exactly. God supernaturally will bring the nation of Israel out of Egypt. The 10 plagues that He created are not only recorded in the Bible, you can also find them on the hieroglyphics in Egypt. God gives Moses the Mosaic covenant, which consists of the law. There were 10 commandments plus 360 more laws. And by Jesus' day, the religious leaders, the Pharisees, had increased those 360 laws to over 4,000. It was virtually impossible to get up and walk out of your house without breaking a law in Jesus' day. Okay? That tells you how hard it was for Jesus, or it must have been for Jesus, to be sinless if you had 4,000 laws that you couldn't do. The Levitical system was how God asked them to worship Him. Okay? And they then end up going, get scattered in the desert for 40 years. We know that whole story. And they end up finally, 40 years later, at the entrance to the Promised Land. They're going to enter Jericho. They are going to walk around Jericho and blow the trumpets and announce that God is coming, and the walls will fall down. This is an article from the New York Times. It's in February 25th, 1990. Study backs the biblical story of Jericho. Jericho is the only place in the Middle East where the walls fell out. There is no group of people who will go to a city, throw the grappling iron, the wire up there, and pull the walls down upon themselves. They had battering rams to knock them that way. But Jericho, they all fell out. And by the way, scientists and archaeologists love to dig at Jericho. The reason they love to dig at Jericho is there's stuff everywhere, because God told them, don't take a thing, leave it. And so they love to dig at Jericho. Okay? And God then told them, I want you to drive out all the people in the land, but they didn't do it. Here's Numbers 33:55.
But if you do not drive the inhabitants of the land, those you allow to remain will become barbs in your eyes and thorns in your side. They will give you trouble in the land where you will live. One
of the groups of people that they did not get out of the land was the Philistines. Who are the Philistines today? Palestinians, that's correct. Do they give them trouble in the land where they live? Yes, they do. Big time. Had they listened to God, they wouldn't have had to, we wouldn't have to listen to them in the 6 o'clock news. I know that's what we do every day. That takes us to session 2, the end of the review. And tonight we're going to look at the Abrahamic covenant. You will never understand the Bible unless you understand the Abrahamic covenant. Okay? But before we do that, we want to look at some actual church bloopers once again so that we keep everything in perspective. The first one is this. The associate minister unveiled the church's new tithing campaign slogan last Sunday. I up my pledge, now up yours. A new loudspeaker system has been installed in the church. It was given by one of our members in honor of his wife. Okay. The Old Testament, okay, it was written within a 2,000-year period by 25 different authors. And remember now, the order of the Old Testament is not inspired. It was based on the size of the scrolls and how often they had to go through them. They always went to Genesis. That was the first one. They rarely went to Haggai or Malachi or some of those, and they were on the very last, okay? This is an article that came out of the Austin American Statesman, so we know that it's true. And it came out of March 6, 1994. And it says, centuries-old rivalries fuel the unrest on the West Bank. And I'm going to read some of this because it's important. In perhaps the most notable land transaction in history, the book of Genesis describes how Abraham secured the permission of the community and purchased his family burial site in Hebron's rocky hills. People don't understand. This isn't just over land.